Welcome everyone to today's CFOLC special presentation, F&A Benchmarks, Prophecy or Pretense, Leveraging Industry Data to Drive Shared Services Optimization, presented by Oxis. My name is Angela Tice. I'm the National Membership Chair and the Northeast Regional Director, and I'll be facilitating today's session. So I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we actually get started. You might have noticed that your lines are muted, and that's really so that there are no distractions. However, we certainly encourage your questions and your comments for today's discussion, so please feel free to type your question in the questions area, and we'll make sure to get those questions answered on your behalf. I will be monitoring that area, and as I said, we'll make sure that we address your concerns and your questions. If you are a member of the CFO Leadership Council, you will receive 1 CPE for today's webcast. Now, to receive credit, you must be a current member and answer 4 of the polling questions asked today. We will interrupt the discussion to bring those to you, and we'll give you a chance to answer. In order to answer the polling questions effectively, you must be logged into today's session. If you've dialed in and you want to receive CPE, you need to hang up and use the direct link provided to you at registration. So in other words, you need to be on your computer in order to get CPE for today's discussion. Just a couple of other things. Just want to remind you that since the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, the CFOLC has pivoted to help support our community. So of course, we moved every live event online, and we hope you're taking advantage and continuing to connect with us. There's a full list of online programs on our website, and CPEs are offered for current CFOLC members. We want to keep our friends and members connected. So if you're wondering how to become a member, connect with me after the webcast. We do have 2 different levels of involvement, and membership does start the day you join. With October almost ending, there was a full schedule of things that you could have gotten involved with, and I just want to bring your attention really to what's happening in November. Our national conference is happening November 11th through the 13th, and that too is now totally virtual, and it is free to our premium members. So if you're interested in joining the CFO Leadership Council, the conference will be free to you as long as you join as a premium member. And also, this is the last week to sign up for the masterclass with MIT Sloan. If you can make it, I absolutely say go for it. You'll be glad that you did. From what I understand, there's 3 seats left. So if this is something that interests you, studying with MIT Sloan, it's really an experience. So I highly recommend doing it if you can find the time. Finally, just want to mention that most of our webcasts and virtual discussions are recorded so that our members can check in and either listen again or listen to those that you might have missed. At this time, we don't offer CPE when listening to the recordings, but it's always great to check in and hear what our experts have to say. While you're in that membership portal, don't forget, look for our partner experts as well. Many of them have what they call virtual offices. You can visit, find excellent information in a vast amount of areas, and you can reach out to them directly if you have specific questions or specific need. If you have any questions about how to get into that, our National Sponsor Relations Manager, Katie Todd, is a great expert and can certainly guide you in that area, so I highly recommend getting in touch with her. So that's really it for the housekeeping. I just wanted to bring all of that to you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. We have Enrique Martinez, Finance Transformation Managing Director at Oxis, Eric Libros, Senior VP and Managing Director, Business Transformation at Oxis, Courtney Dominguez, RPA, Strategic Consultant, Independent, and Rachel Collins, Principal Research Lead Financial Management at APQC. So to all of you, thank you so much for coming on and offering out your knowledge today. I know our members have asked us to help them find some real solutions to challenges they have faced, especially this year. So I'm sure they'll gain some great insight from what you'll be sharing today. So with that, Eric, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Angela, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. So in today's session, we're going to be discussing how to effectively use benchmark data to identify opportunities for efficiency and performance in your finance and accounting operations. As Angela mentioned, my name is Eric Libros, and our firm, Auxis, provides management consulting and outsourcing services to mid to large enterprise companies across a variety of industries. I run the company's business transformation practice, which focuses on all the different ways we help companies get more drive performance and efficiency in their business operations. And we do this through a variety of service lines, which include shared services, advisory and implementation services, process redesign and automation services, organizational design and restructuring, and business process outsourcing through our nearshore center that we have in Costa Rica. And for all of these different areas, we use benchmark data extensively to help define and identify and target specific opportunities. I'll be moderating a panel discussion today with several people that I'm very excited to share the stage with. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you. Courtney, let's start with you.
I'm Courtney Dominguez. I am an RPA strategic consultant. I work independently, helping companies to both implement and expand their RPA programs. I have about 20 years of industry experience with both IT and financial operations. I spent 14 of those at World Fuel Services, and as part of that, we migrated our shared services to Costa Rica and expanded that out, and used benchmarking data quite a bit in that transition. So looking forward to having this discussion today.
Thanks, Courtney. Rachel, your turn.
Great. So good morning, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Rachel Collins. I am with the APQC. We are a nonprofit benchmarking and best practice research organization. And I've been here for a little over 20 years. Hard to believe how time flies when you're having fun. But most recently, I've been responsible for the financial management research that we offer to our members and customers, and publishing that content on our resource library. In terms of finance and accounting benchmarking, I've actually been involved in that since 1998. So again, dating myself just a little bit, but looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Rachel. And finally, my associate, Enrique Martinez. Enrique, your turn.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Enrique Martinez. I have an array of experiences accumulated over 15 years in global finance operations, shared services, and outsourcing industries. As the head of the finance transformation consulting practice at Auxis, I focus on developing innovative business solutions to help finance executives improve operational efficiency and transform their finance and accounting function. I'm not a career consultant. I consider myself an accountant by trade. I spent almost 10 years at a global investment bank in various controllership roles. Most notably as the VP of the Expense Management Department, I led the department's shared service strategy and operating model transformation, and I am based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. So thank you all for being here with us virtually, and we look forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Enrique. Also, kind of in the background is another one of our associates, Fabiana Corredor, who, if you have any questions throughout, and we encourage you to ask questions, Fabiana will be fielding those questions, and when appropriate, will step in to pose those questions to the panel. So Fabiana, say a quick hello.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
So before we start with the panel discussion, we're going to have a brief presentation on the topic of benchmarking. We're really going to focus on the various types of benchmark data that provide good insights into your operations, and we're going to give you a real-life example of how to use benchmarking to create a roadmap for performance improvements and optimization, and some of the key strategies that sit behind that help drive those improvements. So Enrique, take it away.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. So we'll start with some data points. Look, there's no doubt of the impact the pandemic has had on companies, right? This year we've been operating in an area of unprecedented business disruption, really led by continued uncertainty. Right? Finance executives are feeling the pressure, continued to be asked about staffing levels, and bottom line, to do more with less, right? So leveraging industry benchmarks to rate the services that your function is providing can be an important component in really assessing the existing health and quality of your business operation, right? As evident by studies conducted by industry leaders like APQC and PwC, right? Operating costs can vary significantly within an industry. And top performers, typically what we've seen is typically can operate at half or even more or even less than the cost of their industry peers, right? If we kind of look at this data point in the top right corner, one very interesting observation by a recent APQC study was that found that companies that benchmark their processes were 14% more effective in managing their business processes. So what does that tell us? I think it does. If you simply incorporate benchmarking and managing your function, the data points to significant benefit realization. Right. So that's what we're going to get into today. And we focus on this pie chart on the bottom right. This was a registration poll question that everyone answered. Really, what's significant to highlight here is that 30% of our colleagues are best in class and already operating in a fully optimized finance organization of the future. That's great. So hopefully by the end of this discussion, we'll give you some tools and strategy to kind of help everyone join that elite group. Okay, so again, overall the cost of the finance function KPI is really one of the most scrutinized. What you see here is that there is a significant difference between a top performer and a bottom performer. This is sort of across the board, across industries, right? But you can see that a top performer is almost 2.5 times lower cost than a bottom performer. So let's start a little bit with the basics and talk about standard benchmark terminology, as we're going to discuss it throughout the session. So we start left to right. When we talk about a top performer, what does that really mean? So a top performer, when there's a study, when there's a survey conducted, and the responses are gathered, the top performer is the top quartile. So that is organizations which reflect performance level that are above 75% of all responses received. On the other hand, bottom performers is the opposite. So the bottom quartile, reflecting that performance levels are 25% or below from the respondents. And in the middle median that's your 50%. That's that's your average performer. So most people think about KPIs as measures of cost or quality, right? But not all benchmarks are created equal. An optimized organization should really have a balanced focus on both effectiveness and efficiency of the function. Effectiveness KPIs tend to be more common because they're very powerful in measuring cost. And the data tells us again that there could be that the differences between top and bottom can be dramatic. For example, I'm going to quote another study by APQC that in the sense that only an 11% difference in invoice processing and payment accuracy between a top and bottom performer really ends up correlating to up to a 62% variance in day sales outstanding and your DSO KPI, right? So very impactful. Right. So, and on the other hand, efficiency really focuses more on productivity. Right. Traditional efficiency metrics focus on the number of FTEs or full-time equivalents that are performing various tasks. In comparing that to organizations within your industry and revenue size. So, and why is the comparison within your industry, within your revenue size important? Because it's all about volumes and complexity, right? You're going to assume that a company with higher volumes will likely have larger number of transactions being performed and therefore requiring more people to be able to manage those processes, right? Additionally, when we talk about industries, industries may have, depending on the industry, can depend on the complexity of the transactions, right? So for example, excuse me, a manufacturing distribution company that's selling to, let's say, a big box customer will have operational complexity in comparison to a professional services that may be serving the same customer. They're not going to have that complexity level, right? So it's very important when you're going through a benchmark exercise that you have a comparison essentially as apples to apples. Yeah, so again, efficiency KPIs, these are going to measure how efficient resources are performing the work, right? So what we want to do here is just want to give you a very high-level view of what are 5 core KPIs that are common and that you should start to track, right? So let's speaking on the first one in terms of FTE, just want to make a point here in understanding the difference between headcount and FTE. Headcount refers to the number of actual employees. So when you look at your chart, how many people you have in your organization. On the other hand, FTE is a calculation. And so to calculate FTE, you have to take the number of full-time equivalents that are employed during the year to perform a particular process of or activity. Right, and you must prorate that in terms of hours, and you have to assume that a full-time worker represents a 40-hour week. Why is that important? It's because most of the benchmarks that you see in the industry are really measured on an FTE basis, not necessarily on a headcount basis. Okay. Cost, we talked a little bit about cost KPIs. You've got to measure it, but you have to normalize it by some factor. Again, we talked about revenue, industry, but generally, as we all know, the lower the number here in this KPI, the better you are in terms of performing, all things being equal. And then the next 3 are really a little bit more focused on functions within finance and accounting. So an important KPI for general accounting is to measure the number of days that it takes to close the books, right? In other words, cycle time, right? So cycle time KPIs measure duration, and here, the lower the results, the better, right? So why is it important to have a lower cycle time in accounting? Why is it important to have shorter number of days to close the books? Well, it means, by doing so, it means that you get financial statements, you get critical performance, business insights to your partners, to your business leaders, in order to enable faster decision making. Absolutely critical in the times that we live in. The other 2 are relate to the accounts payable function and the accounts receivables functions, right? And they're really more focused on productivity. So these KPIs will measure the output produced per input, and typically here's the opposite. A higher number it means that you're a better performer, right? So again, for accounts payable, it's important to measure the total number of invoices processed per FTE, and this can give you a sense of how efficient your department is in accomplishing their tasks, right? And can also guide you to potential areas of opportunities and highlight potential improvements. And the same goes for accounts receivables. Yeah, you want to measure the number of customer receipts that your department is processing.
So this brings us to our first polling question. Angela, could you take that on?
Absolutely. So I just launched that audience, and if you could answer that as quickly as possible, we can get back to this great presentation. I will let this be open for just a couple of seconds, and because panelists, you cannot see this, I will share the results with you in just a couple more seconds. So again, audience, we're giving you some time to answer the first polling question. And the question is, have you used benchmarking to help define process optimization initiatives in your finance organization? And there are 4 answers. Yes, I've made extensive use of benchmarking. Yes, I've used it, but it's not been a major factor. Or no, but I would like to. Or no, I don't see value in benchmarking. So we will get the answer. I'm going to close that now. And now I'm going to share those answers. So it looks like 29% said, yes, I've made extensive use of benchmarking. 35% say, yes, I've used it, but it's not been a major factor. 33% no, but I would like to. And 4% said, no, I don't see value in benchmarking. Back to you, Eric.
That's great. That's interesting how it's pretty much across the board, but at least everybody does see value in the benchmarking process. The question is, how effectively do you use it? And I think if you look at that second question, it's not been a major factor. I would say I think it's probably not been a major factor because you haven't probably understood how to use it effectively, and hopefully we'll give you some tips on that through this exercise. So let's continue on with the presentation.
Yeah, so good point there, Eric. I think we'll really talk about okay, once you establish a benchmark, what do you do with it, and how to use it effectively, right? So let's talk about a real world example, right? So we often talk about how benchmarks really illuminate areas of opportunities, and then we sometimes refer to it as, depending on the benchmark, it can be a neon sign, a glaring neon sign that just blinking and highlights, look, this is an area of opportunity, right? So let's get into it, right? So considering working with 600 million consumer goods company with operations in North and Latin America across 7 countries. Right? The finance and accounting function had a total of 110 FTEs, and that was across all the major towers. And so that sounded high. The finance executives felt that they were high in terms of FTEs, and so we applied a very quick benchmark exercise, and what it told us is that the company was more than double the bottom performer level. Right, so a bottom performer would be around 49 FTEs. That's a significant gap, right? So
and one thing I'd point out is if you look at the data, the one that really jumps out at you is the record to report area, where they had 57 FTEs compared to the bottom performer having 17. So more than 3 times the number of FTEs in that area. So clearly that's an indicator of something that you would want to take a further look at. So Enrique, what did we do?
Yeah, so what was the opportunity, right? So how did we use this? And again, so we talked about 110 FTEs total. Looking at the organization, knew that there would be a requirement to maintain 2 people in each of the countries to do a lot of the business partnering with the leaders, businesses that would remain in country. So we decided, okay, well, those 14 would be retained, leaving us with really 96 FTEs in scope for optimization. Now, we assumed that what we typically have experienced and observed that through consolidation, through centralizing activities, through reorganizing the functions, that you can achieve the minimum of 20%. So 19 FTEs efficiencies were gained by doing things like reorganizing the way the functions were being performed. That means really, what are a lot of people are doing very different things, but let's reorganize the way things are being done today. Meaning the transactional, more repetitive type of activities, you centralize that within one group, because that will require a particular skill set in comparison to some of the more industry in-depth or the technical accounting type of knowledge is required for some of the higher end type of functions. You want to segregate those, and you want to have the appropriate skill sets performing those functions, right? So through reorganization, doing centralization and consolidation, achieving 20% efficiencies, right? Furthermore, leveraging intelligence automation, really has had an added benefit of 40%. And how do you do that, right? And typically we've seen significant benefits in terms of using technologies like RPA. I mentioned earlier, when you restructure and you have maybe the transactional type of activities done, in a particular manner. That's where you can leverage RPA. You can leverage RPA and really automate all of your rule-based repetitive tasks and be very efficient and successful in doing so. So ultimately, what is that? That leads us to an optimized organization of 47 FTEs, right? That's a reduction of 49 FTEs through the optimization program. And that's a significant impact. Right? So that was 2.5 million annualized savings, right? But what's important to highlight about this example, and the reason why we kind of wanted to highlight this is not so much for the impact in terms of numbers, but you kind of go back and we look at the benchmarks. We said the bottom performer was 49.2%. So even at an optimized level, this company is at 47%. So it's just slightly better than bottom performer. Right. So which kind of leads us into the discussion that we really want to get into it and how you want to use benchmarks.
Yeah, and I think when you look at this exercise, why are they at the bottom levels? I think part of it is because the way they're structured from a corporate from a regional perspective, people had to stay in region, and each region had its own unique set of regulatory requirements that you had to manage to. So it added layers of complexity to the process that required more than the typical number. A simpler operation where you're just pulling people together, you'd probably get a better result, but you probably wouldn't have as many people out there doing the work in the first place. So the whole point of this, and as Rike was mentioning, is, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to benchmarking. You need to understand what's going on in the business, and what this exercise does is points you in the right direction. Now you start to dig deeper.
So, what are your aspirations along those lines, right? Top performer may not make sense for all organizations, as we just highlighted, right? And that in a sense seems counterintuitive. Uh, so you have to do a little bit of analysis after you have your benchmark, right? The level of investments and systems and process automation and getting the organization behind it, the amount of work that goes behind as you're doing the day-to-day operations in order to get to a top performer may not deliver enough benefits or fast enough to warrant that level of effort and investment, right? So, typically, on the other hand, and going back to the prior example, things like process automation can deliver strong ROIs, right? We within our RPA practice, we experience payback periods that are less than 12 months and typically are significantly lower than that, right? So for most organizations, that may be an investment, right? So, but really the rule of thumb that can kind of be applied, and we've seen it in practice, is, if you're a bottom performer, if you're not nowhere near, you really want to achieve, or you want to at least initially move towards a medium performer. And that's really a more realistic goal if you're considering improvement opportunities, improvement initiatives, right? So again, it seems a little, weird to think about it, because nobody wants to aspire to be average. But as illustrated in the earlier example, just making that progression can have enormous results.
And if I could just add, at the end of the day, when you're making the decision of where you want to be and how you want to get there, I think a big part of this is taking a look at what that road is to get you there and how difficult it's going to be to navigate. Some companies, they often make excuses for why they're at a certain level, and they're willing to accept it. So, it's very common when we share our benchmarking results to say, well, yeah, but we're different. Well, you're not that different than all the. Remember, we're looking at industry, we're looking at demographics and size and complexity. So you're probably not that different. You just have to realize that there's going to be changes that you need to make to get you there. So a big part of this process to make that decision of where you want to go is accepting the fact that you're at a level that you want to improve upon. So we just see that as one of the steps that you have to overcome when you're making that transition.
Yep. And so what are the guiding principles? Right? What are the things that you should keep in mind as you as you embark on this? And what's really the framework for doing benchmarking? Kind of as Eric said, first step is you start with the end in mind. Right? What are the objectives? What is it that you want to accomplish? And get the organization behind you. Communicate with your teams and ensure the organization is aligned with those objectives, goals that are desired. Once you know your mission, do some planning. Do some research, and identify the benchmarks and the KPIs that you want to track. Right. Then benchmark the performer. Benchmark it against others within the industry. Understand what are your peers doing, and really, once you do that benchmark and once you get that measure, you know where you are. Take some time to understand why you're there, why you're there today. Right? Then use tools like process mapping and data analysis to determine the biggest gaps, and that will allow you to prioritize areas for improvement. This is where we think the real value of a benchmarking exercise is. And again, as Eric has mentioned, benchmarks on their own standalone, they're just data points, right? But they can guide you to low-hanging fruit. They can guide you to opportunities, and then be able to prioritize. So it is absolutely vital to drill down and understand the root causes for those identified areas, and to really develop an improvement strategy, and ultimately come up with a plan that you're going to be able to execute. Right? And after you execute, you want to go back, recalibrate, remeasure the results again. Right? And there you want to use lessons learned to avoid pitfalls, identify and communicate what worked well, and then take on to the next improvement opportunity. It's important to leverage existing reporting tools, such as Power BI, for example, to establish consistent and to some extent really automate your reporting, so that this exercise is not a one-time labor intensive, effort intensive exercise, but it's a continuous part of the management of your process, right? So, and that's the last point, right? You want to repeat this exercise. You want to instill a culture of continuous improvement so that you can remain competitive in this disruptive world.
And I want to just add that in circling back to the chart that was at the beginning of the presentation from the people who signed up for the webinar, so that 13% who said they were, leveraging shared services and it's fully optimized, I challenge you to say, are you truly fully optimized? You may be at the moment, but remember, this is a cyclical process. It's a continuous improvement process. So at the end of the day, you could be optimized at a point, but things are always going to change. So I would encourage you to keep vigilant, keep your eye on operations, and don't just assume that your optimization remains at the same levels, because things will change in your business, things will change in how information comes in and out of the business, new technology innovations. It's all things that you should be looking at and incorporating as part of your operating model. And this brings us to our second polling question.
I'm going to launch that right now. And the question there, audience, what is the most pressing pain point you are trying to address in your finance organization? So select one, achieving a cost reduction target, freeing up my team for higher value work, improving quality, speed, and service to the business, scaling to absorb future growth, or all of the above. So again, audience, if you can answer that quickly, we can then get on to the next part of our conversation here. Just a couple more seconds, Eric, and then I'll share that with everyone.
Great, thank you.
Yep. And thank you, audience, for being right on it and answering the polling questions quickly. We appreciate that. Okay. So just so that the audience can see what the audience is thinking here, 12% said achieving a cost reduction target, 21% said freeing up my team for higher value work, 14% improving quality, speed, and service to the business, 12% scaling to absorb future growth, and 42% said all of the above. That's interesting.
That is interesting, and it really speaks to the challenges and complexities facing finance executives today, that there's so many different elements in their operations that they just need to address. Many of us are being required to manage cost, but part of that cost is to help make the business more flexible and give you more time to do other activities, and really to be able to deliver more back to the business. So I'm not surprised at the answer, but it just speaks to the complexity of the overall operations.
Great.
So this brings us to our panel discussion. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask a series of questions to our panelists, and I'm going to ask specifics, but again, anybody can chime in at any point. And at the same time, Fabiana, if there are any questions that come in that are relevant to the topic we're discussing, please don't hesitate to bring them up. Okay. So let's start with the topic of industry trends. Rachel, let's start with you. Have you seen a spike of interest from finance executives and to get more benchmarking information about themselves since the pandemic began? Is that something that companies are more interested in now today than before?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. Certainly during this time with the pandemic and the resulting economic recession, I'd say that we've seen a lot of interest from our members and from our customers that we work with around cash flow and liquidity, as you can imagine. As our CFO here at APQC is very fond of saying, cash is king. And so the organizations that we work with have really increased the questions that they ask us for benchmarks, for benchmarking, and for best practices information for topics ranging from liquidity to cash management to cash forecasting. Forecasting accuracy is a big one. FP&A, planning, budgeting, scenario planning, and business continuity. And I saw that y'all have a webinar coming up on business continuity. And so I would say to that end, and a big part of our mission as a nonprofit and as a benchmarking and research organization is dissemination. And so we've really been focusing on disseminating our research around these topics of liquidity and cash flow. Just to give you a sense, we do a monthly metric of the month with CFO online and publish a monthly column. And so April's column, right after we were kind of in the thick of the pandemic, was on days payable outstanding. May's column was on days sales outstanding. June's was on the average cycle time in hours to develop a short-term cash flow forecast. And August was around uncollectible balances as a % of revenue. And by the way, anybody on the line today can access that information. If you just Google APQC and CFO online, you can see the metric of the month and kind of the actual data and our advice in terms of how to improve on those measures. So I guess the bottom line is we've seen, an increase in questions and a lot of interest around liquidity benchmarks, working capital benchmarks, and in the treasury space.
So interesting. So you're seeing more of a focus on those areas than the more traditional, process optimization, improving overall efficiency and productivity in the organization.
Okay, no, those are still highly
okay.
Still highly of interest. Those do not go away, and that's kind of our bread and butter. But I would say we've seen a spike kind of in questions around those topics and looking for benchmarks and best practices information.
Well, it certainly makes sense given, what's been going on in the world. So let's talk about, we gave you a real life example of an engagement that we had with a client. Courtney, you've actually lived the life. You took an organization, focused on providing optimized operations there, and actually transitioned it to a center in Costa Rica. Can you share with us how you were able to leverage benchmarking data to help define your strategy and planning for that?
Yeah, so I think it's really around actually the framework side that you presented earlier, Enrique. So when we were migrating our operations to Costa Rica, we were consolidating, a number of functions from around the world. We have World Fuel has offices, globally, and so they were really taking a number of resources and consolidating them down in the shared service center in Costa Rica. And when we did that, we looked at a number of benchmarks. So I think there's so many benchmarks out there. Part of the framework that you provided is really picking your key drivers, right? So understanding why are you doing this activity, what are your drivers, and then aligning your benchmarks to that. It was different in some areas, not every area was the same. The example I'm going to provide is around cash applications, and our drivers were really around cost and productivity. So, we didn't have quality issues, we didn't have cash flow issues. We were very diligent about getting the cash applied, getting cash in, but it was really around how can we do that more efficiently and at a lower cost. And so, of course, we did the lift and shift. We took our functions and we left some of them in Miami. The rest of them we migrated to Costa Rica. After we did the lift and shift, then we started looking at it and saying, okay, how can we optimize this? And this really is where the benchmarks came in. I mean, we looked at, a number of FTEs. We realized we were higher than average for FTEs, the number of FTEs performing the cash application function. One of the reasons for that is because we didn't have a lot of automation. So typically your cash application numbers are going to be somewhere around 80% automated, 20% manual. We were the exact opposite. We were 20 and 80 and completely flipped. And I think actually when you talked earlier about being a top performer, We weren't looking at going from 20 to 80. You're not going to get from 20 to 80 overnight. We were just wanted to see that number climb closer to, where those top performers are in the 80% range. So, we kind of set our medium performer goal and said, what can we do to get a little bit closer to the top? Because right now we know we're far closer to the bottom than we are at the top. So we looked at, we looked at FTEs, we looked at productivity, and then obviously cost was a huge factor as well. So, with a large number of FTEs doing all of this manual application, we started to look at and see, okay, how can we reduce cost? Moving the resources to the center in Costa Rica is certainly one way to do that, but another way that we looked at it was automation and optimization. So then after we did the lift and shift, we had our resource in Costa Rica, then we started to look at how can we optimize the process, how can we do much more automation, so that way then, we get closer to that 80%, much closer to that 80% than we were over a period of time. So we started leveraging benchmarks. We started looking at the benchmarks that were important to us and how can we get better. And then again, back to your slide, on repeat, we had to calculate our metrics internally first. So once we had our metrics, we did that on a quarterly basis to ensure that we were kind of moving closer. And then we reviewed our benchmark data on an annual basis. So we compared our metrics to see how we were doing to those kind of annual benchmarks. And the good news is our teams were getting much more efficient, and the costs were reduced as we really focused on those efforts. So there were a number of other areas that we used benchmark data in as well. But for me, I think this one really told a great story because we really were able to leverage that and get our numbers better and our metrics better aligned.
That's great. What about in your current role, RPA consulting? Have you seen benchmarks provide some good guidance for you and your clients?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that especially when you're looking at RPA, a lot of times at that point you've already done your benchmark and your metrics data, right? So you've got your metrics, you've looked at them against your benchmark, and now you're looking at how can I really automate things like we did with our cash applications at World Fuel. How can we really automate things much more in order to get those internal metrics closer to the benchmark? So definitely seeing clients are doing that analysis, especially when they're picking the processes that they want to automate. They're looking at it and saying, okay, let's look at our metrics, let's look at our benchmarks. And so when I help with that analysis of how do we pick the processes that we want to automate, benchmarks and metrics are certainly a key factor in that discussion because typically those are going to be the ones that give you a higher ROI on the ones that you're automating.
Great, thanks. Enrique, you provided a good example in the presentation. Any other examples you want to share?
Enrique, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, I think what I want to highlight going back to the polling question and the answer for the second question and how most of the participants answered to all of the above. I think specific to RPA, right? What we've experienced is that obviously you can leverage that technology to reduce cost, but it also has the benefit of really removing the transactional, the more repetitive stuff. So the bottom line, people in general don't like to do the same thing over and over and over, right? So those things can be automated. RPA is a great solution for that. So allowing you to allowing the function to free up some time to do more higher end, more value added type work. And then also ultimately, in terms of another benefit is the robots are rule based. So from an audit standpoint, from a quality standpoint, there's no errors. So it improves the quality of the service that you're providing, and ultimately you can use it to scale growth. So you can quickly add more robots, enhance the technology so that you can use it for to scale the organization.
Great. So continuing with Enrique, what do you think the most common mistakes that companies make when they're starting this type of exercise with benchmarking?
Yeah, so I know we talked a little bit about it during the presentation. It really is, you have to do a number of things. And one, you have to ensure that when you're benchmarking yourself, you're benchmarking to your peers. And by peers, it means within your industry, within your revenue size, within your geographical location, geographical location. Additionally, I'll kind of give you an example of another engagement that we did, where when we did this exercise, they had significant amount of people that were doing reconciliations, just involved in reconciliation. It was very similar to the example earlier. They were close to being double the bottom performer. So that's the information that we had gathered, and they thought they were high there, and they wanted to implement some a reconciliation tool. But when we actually did a deep analysis, they were comparing themselves to just healthcare, but they had a unique business model where they had people in different hospitals across the United States, and they were very much focused on various degrees of technologies and tools. So when we did a deeper analysis and really benchmarked them to an appropriate industry, an appropriate peer, it ended up being that they were close to median from a reconciliation standpoint, right? So again, that's one of the mistakes to avoid is don't just take a general industry and think that and compare yourself. That you really have to do a bit of planning work to identify who truly your peers are, and then compare yourself to and benchmark yourself to that peer group.
Thanks. Rachel, when companies engage with APQC, have you seen some mistakes that you knew were going to happen based on how they were using the data, and what do you think they can do to avoid these type of issues?
We have seen no mistakes, and everybody is perfect. Now,
that's great.
Yeah, no, I just want to, I agree with Enrique for sure, but I also want to provide a counterpoint maybe to that. So we would definitely recommend that organizations do benchmarking regularly, and if possible, we would ask them to consider benchmarking at 3 levels. For the organizations that are bigger and maybe more geographically dispersed, or conglomerates or what have you, bigger, we would recommend that they first benchmark internally. You're going to have very high, likeness internally. It's the easiest way to do it. And oftentimes there's pockets of excellence within large organizations that they don't even realize. And you can really benefit from that. Usually the cost of this kind of benchmarking is lower. And many organizations that do this well have some kind of best practice transfer process. That's a formal process, and we have articles on that I can certainly send as a follow-up if that's of interest to anybody. Secondly, within your industry, so do take a look at that cut. We've talked about that at length within this panel. That gives you a good comparison in terms of what the others within your group are doing. Also, with similar characteristics as Enrique talked about. But the third piece that we highly recommend that organizations do is also benchmark outside of your industry, that cross-industry cut, because this shows you what's possible. And something to think about is that if you only benchmark within your own industry, you will only aspire to be as good as those in your industry. But what if your industry is not that good? So, something to just think about. When I started at APQC, I actually started in the customer call center benchmarking area, and we did a lot of benchmarks around customer service and customer experience, and those folks have reams and reams of metrics, and they have them electronically displayed and so on and so forth. Customer service is a good one to think about benchmarking outside of your industry, because, for example, a hospital, they have customer service, but oftentimes they're not necessarily thinking about, now the best ones are, but they may not be thinking about their patients as customers, and so that's where maybe benchmarking against a hospitality industry for hospitals, against a Ritz-Carlton, that kind of thing. So benchmarking outside of your industry really helps you to have that out-of-the-box thinking. That would be one of the mistakes I would encourage organizations. Another is making sure that you're engaging in apples-to-apples comparisons, and that you've got key terms defined and the scopes of the benchmarks clearly defined. That's why in our benchmarking that we do as part of our Open Standards Benchmarking Initiative, we tie everything back to that process classification framework taxonomy, where you've got standard definitions, you've got a standard scope, and you know that you've got an apples-to-apples comparison in the benchmarks. We also normalize those metrics as well so that you can compare across size and can compare across industries. So that's the advantage of true process benchmarking.
So that's very interesting. So do you see a big variance across industries in the similar benchmarks? So if you look at certain benchmarking activities in finance and accounting, you mentioned go outside of your industry. Do you see a big difference between one industry and another?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You certainly can. For example, we've recently been looking at order to cash benchmarking, and we've done some because this project was on looking at the order to cash value stream end to end. And so for the first time, we've been really looking at some of these end to end benchmarks. So FTEs for order to cash value stream per revenue, total order to cash cycle time, and that kind of thing. And there you're definitely going to see some interesting variations by industry. At the very highest level, you might look at manufacturing versus services, and you're going to see some real differences there.
Yeah, I would assume a lot of that though could be about complexity of operations, because manufacturing versus services is very different. But yeah, I would agree.
Complexity, compliance, regulations,
Exactly.
all that.
So, earlier during the presentation, you heard kind of Enrique's and my perspective on where aspiring to be top, medium, or bottom. I don't think anybody's aspiring to the bottom, but if you are, it's pretty easy to get there. Anyway, you've heard our perspective. So I'm interested in some of the other panelists. Courtney, what's your thoughts? Where do you think you should be? For most organizations, does top make sense, and when does it make sense?
I think I think everyone, like you said, should be aspiring, right, to be at the top. I think that the organizations that are probably at the top are very mature in their continuous improvement opportunities. They're probably very mature in automation, the tools that. So I think that those that are at the top are the ones that are really reevaluating and looking at their benchmarks looking at benchmark data and their own internal metrics on a regular basis. So, I think those that are at the top probably really have a well-oiled machine of what they're doing from an internal standpoint and really continuously doing that improvement. I think for, like my example that I gave, we were at the bottom, at least for some of our metrics. Some of our metrics are average, and some of them were far at the bottom. So we just looked and hoped to be, how can we at least just see improvement? We're aspiring to be at the top, but for us, we wanted to be continuously showing that we were improving and getting closer to, for us, what we felt like was, a good place to be and a good metric to be. So, I think the aspirational goal for everybody is to be at the top. Those that are at the top are the ones that are, have probably been doing it right and doing it right for years and using the benchmark data. And for the rest of us, if we can get to the middle, I think we'll be happy, because I think there's a lot of us that are probably closer to the bottom than we are at the middle.
Yeah, I agree. We see that a lot, and just it's a walk before you run type of thing, where make some progress, show some results, get some quick wins, and then maybe you continue in that process. Absolutely. Rachel, what's your perspective?
Well, the top versus medium, I think it's pretty company specific depending on the organization. But I would say that most of the organizations that we talk to and that we profile in case studies and in our research and such are aspiring to top quartile or world-class performance. And just to give you a couple of examples, again, as I mentioned, we recently did a project on order to cash transformation. And one of the organizations that we profiled was Cargill. And they are on a journey of ongoing transformation and moving toward a global process organization in finance and in the larger organization. So as part of that transformation journey, they started by working with external consultants to benchmark against top performing companies. And from there, then they mapped the end-to-end process. They did a lot of business process management work, and they work on redesigning their processes with considerations for the data and the technology requirements that they have. But their primary concern is building capabilities that enable top quartile performance. Another example from the same project is Novartis, big pharmaceutical company, and very similar to many other organizations. They're tracking their order to cash performance against the industry benchmarks. And again, their aim is to perform in the top quartile. They wanted to be very optimistic about this, and they've made a whole lot of progress. So we would recommend that organizations do the benchmarking effort, look at those gaps, And then, oftentimes they use some type of prioritization technique. For example, we've recommended organizations to use criteria testing matrices, and those have, different criteria that you can weight and you can prioritize against in terms of actually selecting those opportunities then to proceed with in terms of process improvement.
Great, thanks.
Eric, since we have 2 more polling questions, maybe this is a good time for Angela to bring the 3rd one.
Sure.
Great, thank you, Fabiana. I just launched it now. So again, audience, we have a couple of minutes left. So if you would quickly do that, we can get back to our panel discussion. The question is, will intelligent automation and or outsourcing non-core transactional functions be part of your 2021 optimization initiatives? So again, thank you, audience, for answering quickly. You're either going to answer, yes, I'm considering both. Yes, I'm considering intelligent automation. Yes, I'm considering outsourcing only. I'm not sure and need guidance. Or no, I'm good. Just a couple more seconds. Thanks for the interruption, everyone.
Yeah, and this question actually goes with the next topic that we had for the panel. So maybe while I guess when we get into the next topic, we can also launch the 4th question for anyone that is having to leave.
Perfect. I'll do that right after this one while they're discussing this. So I'm going to close now and I'm going to share with everyone. And it looks like 43% say yes, I'm considering both. 38, I am considering intelligent automation only. 0 said I'm considering outsourcing only. 5%, I'm not sure and need guidance. And 14% said, nope, I'm good.
Interesting, and this is very consistent with what we're hearing from clients. And even when it comes to the outsourcing question, where 0 said they're considering outsourcing, but they're considering outsourcing only if outsourcing comes with some of the other optimization technologies and improvements that you can get from that process. So we've seen that ourselves in terms of the way companies are responding. So very interesting. So, just, real quick in terms of some of the proven optimization strategies. So we know that, it's all about people, process, technology, right? And it's typically all of the above, and we've talked a little bit about that. But within that spectrum, Courtney, for example, what do you see as, where's the most benefit coming from?
Well, Eric, I've already mentioned my love for RPA, and I'm working as an RPA consultant, right? So, I mean, for me, I think that this question was especially interesting, those that are considering intelligent automation. Gartner forecasts that 90% of large organizations globally will have adopted RPA by 2022. That's a huge number. And I think there's a lot of companies out there that maybe still haven't gone down that path yet, but I do see that that's going to be a huge increase for 2021, especially with so many companies, unfortunately, what we've had to go through this past year, so many companies are doing more with even less than they already were. And, now is the time to really optimize and look at how we can do things more efficiently and really automate things. So, in the case where we were with World Fuel, we actually had an automation team that we were building out and still is in Costa Rica. And I think that's a opportunity where a lot of companies are looking at, it used to be that there weren't a lot of that skill set wasn't really readily available in Costa Rica. And now more and more, it's very competitive. So, to get that skill set in Costa Rica now, it's very competitive between the shared service centers that are down there. A lot of them use very similar tools, and if not, they can learn it very quickly. And, so that landscape in Costa Rica has become even more competitive. So I think that the companies that are looking at potentially both outsourcing and automation are really making the right move, because I think we're going to see a lot of that. We're already seeing a lot of that, especially in Costa Rica. And I think we're just going to continue to, to see that in the year that comes, because it's companies are going to want to ramp up this skill very quickly. And, in some cases you're able to do that in-house, and in other cases, you can outsource that function and get that skill set really fast and be able to help enable your organization.
Thanks. You know, when you look at some of the cost benchmarks for organizations, if you particularly look at top performers, it's clear that there has to be an element of offshore and nearshore costs that are part of the model, given how much savings are being indicated and how much lower cost they're running at. So Enrique, you had prior experience with a large Asia-based outsourcing firm previous to joining Auxis, which has a nearshore model. What's your thoughts about outsourcing for mid-market companies looking to optimize their finance and accounting operations? Do you think it's becoming more of a proven strategy as it has been for the larger multinationals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm going to relate my answer back to the last polling question, which I thought was very interesting. And this is what we're seeing out in the market right now is really what we're calling a hybrid outsourcing partner, a partnership. And what that mean is that well, first of all, to answer your question is yeah, absolutely, we're seeing that more prominent. The mid-market high growth companies are exploring outsourcing as a way to scale, not only reduce costs but to scale. But more importantly, going back to my point on what we're calling a hybrid partner, a hybrid BPO model, is that you can use the outsourcing component to capture one-to-one labor savings, no doubt, that's your labor arbitrage, but then you use a portion of that to self-fund investment in new tools. Right, and that could include, again, we talked extensively about RPA, but other things like machine learning, and really taking on a digital transformation. And I think having a partner that has both capabilities, not only in the outsourcing, but also comes with a strong track record of implementing intelligence and automation, and then, as we've seen in the healthcare example, give you another 30 to 40% savings and efficiencies by leveraging digital tools, is really what where the market is going and what companies should consider in terms of their operating model and who they're going to partner with.
So we're up against the hour. I wanted to see if there's any questions, Fabiana, that the audience may have asked that you wanted to have the panel address, or
Actually,
if not,
what we did is that we started kind of like addressing them privately via the chat to not interrupt you. But any additional questions, we're gonna make sure that we, contact you guys individually to, make sure that we cover the questions.
okay. So with that, I think if people want to stay on, I'd love to ask the panelists if they have any final recommendations or lessons learned, and then we'll wrap up. So
yeah, no, I think Eric, I think this is Angela. Thank you so much, but we do respect everyone's time.
Okay.
So I just want to say thank you so much for all of you spending this hour with us, and I know that our audience is dropping off, so I just wanted to say thank you. And again, I want to just remind all of our audience that if they do have any other questions or they want to get anything specific answered, all of you, I am sure, would welcome their questions. So I recommend that they reach out. They can always reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to connect with Courtney, Eric, Enrique, or Rachel. So please let me know about that. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you so much for your presentation today and all of the knowledge that you shared. I can see that it was valuable to many. There was questions, and you answered them. So thank you again. And this does conclude our presentation on Overcome the Challenges of Global Growth, How to Eliminate, sorry about that, benchmarks, prophecy, or pretense, leveraging industry data to drive.
We can talk about that too, no problem.
I know you.
Bring it on.
That's why I made the mistake, which is quite funny. Thank you all so much. I appreciate your time. This does end our session for today.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Courtney, are we supposed to stay on the line?